The silence of the Velar Rift was not empty. It was a held breath, a swallowing dark that drank sensor pulses and returned nothing but static. Listening post Theta 9 clung to a barren asteroid like a metal barnacle, its dish arrays turned toward the unmapped void. Commander Jyra Tal rested her clawed fingertips on the comms console and watched the translation matrix stumble over a signal that had no business existing. The waveform scrawled across the screen in jagged peaks, a frantic rhythm that needed no linguistic database to interpret. Distress, fear, a plea clawing out of the deep. Her scales, a muted bronze flecked with age lines, tightened across her shoulders. Origin. Lyrian, the Inari communications officer, tilted her head, the nictitating membranes flicking over her wide, dark-adapted eyes. Uncertain. The signal, coming from inside the rift proper, 12 light-years into the exclusion zone. It's not one of the compact languages. It's something older. From the engineering pit, a voice like grinding stone rolled upward. Rask, the Cathari, heaved his armored body toward the console. His segmented limbs clicked against the deck plating as he adjusted a power relay. The beacon tower is still warm. Leftover thermal from the precursor builders, maybe. I can push the signal through it. Amplify the call. Someone might hear. Jyra's jaw muscles worked. The beacon was ancient, predating every civilization that now signed treaties in the core. No one knew who had built it. Using it felt like shouting into a tomb. But the distress signal wouldn't stop, and the compact's official response channels were silent, as always, when it came to the rift. "Do it," she said. Rask coupled the transmitter to the beacon's spine of dead conduits, and something shuddered through the station's frame. Power bled into systems that hadn't hummed in millennia. A deep subsonic thrum propagated outward, a ripple in the fabric of space-time. Lyrian stiffened. "Commander, multiple contacts, phantom-grade returns, but they're not phantoms." The tactical display painted crimson icons across the grid. Ship silhouettes that did not match any known profile, bladed and asymmetrical, sliding out of the rift's heart as though the darkness itself had given birth to them. Void Wraiths. The name was a curse whispered in frontier outposts, a myth the Compact's academicians dismissed as spacer folklore. Stories of vessels that left no survivors, that scooped entire colonies into nothingness before the modern species climbed out of their primordial soups. The first salvo hit before Jyra could order shields raised. The station buckled, gravity stuttering. A console exploded into sparks and Lyrian was thrown against the bulkhead, her thin frame crumpling. Rask roared, a bass vibration, and dragged her clear while secondary explosions flowered across the lower decks. Hull integrity failing in 6 sectors, the station AI intoned without passion. Wraith weaponry bypasses known energy shielding. Jyra hauled herself to the command chair and slammed the emergency broadcast toggle one last time. The beacon pulsed, a dying star flickering in the abyss. Through the viewport she saw them, 3 dreadnoughts, bigger than anything in the compact fleets, their hulls drinking in ambient light like spilled ink. No visible engines, no emissions. They simply glided forward, silent and inevitable. The forward Wraith ship rotated its central spire. A beam of collapsed light licked out and severed Theta 9's primary array. The station screamed through its bulkheads. "It has been an honor," Rask rumbled, bracing himself over Lyrian's unconscious form. Jyra closed her inner eyelids and waited for annihilation. The kill shot never came. Instead, the void behind the Wraith fleet tore open. Not a hyperspace rupture or a jump corridor. Those were neat, civilized things. This was a wound, a split in the fabric of reality that bled no light and revealed the true darkness beyond the dark. Out of that fissure poured ships, angular and brutal and dense, their hulls the color of storm clouds over a dead sea. They moved with a purpose that made Jyra's breath catch in her throat. The lead vessel, a wedge-shaped monster whose flanks bore no markings, no signals, no hails, oriented on the Wraith dreadnoughts and opened fire. The weapon's discharge was soundless in vacuum, but the light was a searing, punishing white, laced with filaments of something that hurt to look at. The first Wraith ship split along its length like a fruit ripped apart by invisible hands. Gyra's console flooded with data her systems could not categorize. Ship mass, velocity, energy signatures that broke every known physical model. The unknown fleet moved with a coherence that bordered on telepathy, each vessel slotting into a formation that shifted and breathed. A voice, deep and impossibly calm, cut across every open channel. The translation matrix stuttered, then locked on. Vessel transmitting the beacon, respond. This is Captain Elias Vance, Terran Dominion Navy warship Relentless. We detected protocol activation. State your identity and status. Gyra stared at the words scrolling across her display. Terran, human, the myths from the pre-compact era, the builders of the beacon, the ghosts who had supposedly cleansed the galaxy before vanishing. They were real. And they had just descended from the darkness, with a war fleet that was methodically erasing the terror of the rift. The station's emergency lights flickered. Rask helped Lyrian sit up, her eyes glassy but aware. On the tactical display, the Wraith icons winked out one after another, shattered into component atoms by the relentless hammering of the human guns. The Relentless and its escorts did not slow. They pivoted as a single body and advanced on the last remaining Wraith dreadnought, which was attempting to flee back into the rift. A missile, sleek and without visible propulsion, crossed the distance in a heartbeat and detonated inside the enemy's central core. The Wraith vessel imploded, leaving a brief, silent ring of debris. Silence returned. The human ships hung motionless, their weapon ports still glowing with residual heat. Vance's voice came again, less patient now. Respond, beacon station. We will board if you cannot transmit. Gyra's hand shook, not from fear but from the sheer, crushing weight of the unknown as she keyed the comms. This is Commander Gyra Tal, Compact Listening Post Theta 9. We received a distress call and amplified it through the precursor beacon. We had no knowledge of any protocol. We are grateful for your intervention. A pause. Then Vance said, the beacon is not a precursor artifact. It's ours. And you just lit a fire that hasn't burned in a very long time. Stand by for boarding. Do not attempt to power down. The channel clicked off. Rask exhaled a low rumble. What are they? Gyra watched the Relentless rotate and extend a docking umbilical, the mechanism impossibly smooth, as if space itself deferred to the vessel's intent. Something the Compact forgot to believe in, she whispered, and something that just saved us from monsters we didn't think existed. The umbilical sealed against the station's hull with a resonant clang, and the airlock indicator blinked green. Outside, the last remnants of the Wraith attack drifted into the rift, swallowed by the darkness that had birthed them. But Gyra knew, with an instinct honed by decades of frontier duty, that the darkness was far from finished. The inner airlock door irised open, and Captain Elias Vance stepped through without any of the hesitation a reasonable being would show when entering an alien station at gunpoint. He was tall, clad in form-fitting armor plates that moved with a soft, mechanical whisper. His face was unreadable, weathered skin, eyes the color of sea ice, a strong jaw set in an expression that was neither hostile nor welcoming. He carried a sidearm holstered at his thigh, but his hands were empty, clasped lightly behind his back. Two more armored humans followed, their helmets opaque, their rifles held low but ready. The deck plates groaned under their combined weight. Gyra straightened her uniform tunic and stepped forward. Captain Vance, I am Commander Gyra Tal. You have my thanks. Hold your thanks, Vance said, his tone not unkind but utterly devoid of ceremony. He scanned the command center, his gaze lingering on the cracked displays, the sparking conduit Rask was trying to stabilize, and Lyrian, who had managed to prop herself against a bulkhead. Show me the original signal, The one that made you punch our beacon." Rask bristled, his carapace plates scraping together, but Gyra silenced him with a gesture. She transferred the raw waveform data to a portable display. Vance studied it, and something flickered behind his glacial eyes, recognition and a deep, old anger that was too controlled to be called rage. "Void Wraith Distress Mimic," he said. "They seed the void with these calls, lure in ships, stations, whole rescue fleets. Then they feed. Your amplification through our beacon didn't just bounce the signal, it authenticated it as a human origin threat. That's why the protocol fired. That's why we're here." "You're saying we were bait," Gyra said, the words leaving a foul taste on her tongue. "You were a tripwire that got struck by a mimic. It happens. The important thing is you survived, most don't." Vance moved to the viewport and gazed at his warships, which had formed a protective cordon around the shattered listening post. The 7th Fleet was stationed in dark space. No light, no emissions, no contact with home. We sleep in cycles, waiting for a signal that might never come. When the beacon went hot, we thought, well, it doesn't matter what we thought. What matters is the Wraiths used a full dreadnought squadron to hit a single listening post. That's not a raid. That's a probe. They're testing our response time. Lyrian's voice was weak but steady. The Compact has no records of active Wraith incursions. They're considered a threat echo from the pre-sapient era. "The Compact has no records because we erased them," Vance said, turning from the viewport. "Every Wraith massacre, every depopulated system, we cleaned it up before your ancestors discovered fire. We buried the evidence and put a gun to the Dark's head. For eons, that was enough." He looked at Gyra. "It's not enough anymore." One of the armored soldiers murmured something into a wrist comm, and Vance nodded. "The Olympus Mons is hailing. We're to transfer your crew aboard for a full debrief. Your station's a wreck, and it's about to become a target again if I'm reading the sensor drift correctly." "Another attack?" Rask demanded. "Not yet, but the Wraiths don't leave witnesses. The dreadnoughts we killed already dumped a signal packet deeper into the rift. You're marked. The only safe place for you is under our guns." Gyra's mind raced. She was a frontier officer, not a diplomat. She had no authority to accept an invitation onto a foreign warship from a civilization the Compact thought was extinct. But the alternative was to wait on a crippled station for a second wave of monsters that had nearly eaten them alive. "We accept," she said. The transfer was efficient and disorienting. A pressurized tube linked Theta 9 to the Relentless, and within minutes Gyra, Rask, and Lyrian were aboard the human ship. The interior was Spartan, all muted grays and blues with corridors that felt too wide, too empty. The gravity was heavier than Compact standard. Human crew members moved past them with quick, purposeful strides, their faces mostly hidden behind visors. None stared. None spoke. They were escorted to a briefing room where a holographic display dominated the far wall. The image that shimmered into focus was of a woman with iron-gray hair and a command jacket heavy with insignia. Her face was sharp, her expression carved from stone. "I am Fleet Admiral Harlow, commanding officer of the 7th Fleet aboard the Olympus Mons," she said without preamble. "You are the first non-human sentients to witness our existence in close to 200,000 years. I wish it were under better circumstances." Gyra felt Rask tense beside her. 200,000 years. That was before the Compact's founding species had developed interstellar flight, before recorded galactic history. "The Wraiths," Harlow continued, "are not a myth. They are a parasite species that feeds on the psychic residue of dying civilizations. Humanity fought them to a standstill during our expansion era. We lost billions. We lost worlds we can never reclaim. When we finally broke their back, we made a choice. We would not let them rise again. So we faked our own extinction and built the beacon network. We hid in the void, waiting, watching. And now the Wraiths have returned, and they just announced their presence by attempting to slaughter your crew." Vance stepped forward. Admiral, the beacon signal the station amplified contains a Wraith identifier we haven't seen before, a command-level signature. This wasn't a random mimic, it was a targeted test of our trigger response. Harlow's holographic eyes narrowed, which means they know the beacon network exists. They want to map our deployment patterns. A cold dread settled into Gyra's gut. You're saying we didn't just stumble into a trap, we gave away your position. You gave away **A** position, Harlow corrected. The 7th Fleet's emergence point, not the network as a whole. That buys us time, but not much. She paused, and the holographic display shifted to a tactical map of the surrounding sector. Sensors have now identified a second Wraith signature grouping, much larger than the first. It's accelerating out of the rift on a direct intercept course. Dozens of icons bloomed on the display, then hundreds. The scale kept expanding until the screen was a solid smear of hostile markers. Gyra's translator failed for a moment as her own pulse drowned out the audio feed. Rask's voice was barely a whisper. How many? Enough to burn a path to the core, Harlow said flatly. And they're not slowing down. Captain Vance, the Mons is going to battle stations. Bring our guests to observation deck 7. If they're going to be part of this, they should see what they called down. The hologram winked out. Vance gestured toward the door. Follow me, and brace yourselves. What you're about to watch is the reason humanity left the light. They moved through the ship, the distant klaxon of battle stations pulsing like a war heartbeat. Lyrian clutched Gyra's arm, her face pale. Rask walked in silence, his heavy steps echoing. The observation deck was a long gallery with a transparent alloy wall that looked out into the void. The 7th Fleet had assembled in full. Over 200 warships, from knife-like frigates to hulking carriers, arranged in layered spheres. The Olympus Mons dwarfed them all, a fortress of layered composite armor and weapon blisters, its singularity core pulsing with a low thrum that Gyra could feel in her bones. Beyond the human formation, the distant stars began to wink out as the Wraith Armada advanced, blotting the heavens like a spreading stain. Incoming, a tactical officer announced over the shipwide channel. All hands, Condition 1, weapons free in 30 seconds. Vance stood beside Gyra, arms crossed. For what it's worth, Commander, your distress call, even if it was a mimic, gave us a chance to intercept this wave before it hit a populated system. A lot of people are going to live because you were brave enough to answer a cry for help. Gyra couldn't find the words. She watched the human fleet begin to rotate its forward batteries, energy signatures spiking to levels that baffled her suit's sensors. The first salvo lanced out, brilliant and terrible, and the void turned into a crucible of dying stars. The battle was not a battle. It was an execution rendered in light and shattered matter. From observation deck 7, Gyra watched the human fleet fight with a coordination that felt less like military discipline and more like a single organism flexing its claws. The forward screen of destroyers unleashed a volley of missiles that curved and spiraled in mathematically perfect trajectories, each warhead peeling off to find a separate Wraith hull. Detonations flowered across the enemy formation, white-hot spheres that expanded and collapsed, leaving behind only twisted scrap. The Wraiths fired back. Their weapons were beams of null energy that swallowed everything they touched, but the human ships had shields that rippled and held, dissipating the attacks in shimmering veils of plasma. When a frigate's barrier failed, 2 cruisers slid into the gap instantly, covering the wounded vessel while damaged crews sealed the breaches. They're not just fighting, Rask murmured, his voice thick with something Gyra had never heard from him before. They're controlling the tempo. Every move the Wraiths make, they counter before it's committed. It's like they've danced this dance 10,000 times. They have, Vance said from behind them. He had not left the observation deck, though his attention was split between the viewport and a datapad that streamed tactical updates. The Wraiths are predictable when you've been killing them for a few hundred millennia. They adapt, but slowly. They can't comprehend a species that learns faster than they do. The human counteroffensive rolled forward. The Olympus Mons fired its main battery, a set of cannons that did not project energy bolts but ripped momentary tunnels through space-time, delivering singularities to the heart of the Wraith capital ships. Gyra saw a dreadnought 3 times the size of the one that had attacked Theta 9 crumple inward, crushed by its own stolen mass. Within an hour, the Wraith armada was a debris field. The human fleet sustained losses, a frigate, 2 corvettes, but the victory was absolute. Vance finally turned from the viewport. Admiral Harlow will see you now. She has more to explain. They were escorted to the Olympus Mons' primary briefing room, a circular chamber dominated by a solid oak table, a material Gyra's database identified as Earth native, extinct in the wild. The symbolism was not lost on her. Humanity carried its dead world soul with it into the dark. Harlow was already seated, along with several other senior officers. Her expression had not softened, but there was a weariness in the lines around her mouth that spoke of burdens Gyra could not imagine. "You've seen what we are," Harlow began. "Now I'll tell you why we hide. Humanity fought the Wraiths for 900,000 years. That's not an exaggeration. We rose, we fell, we rebuilt, and we rose again. Every time we thought we'd won, they'd return in a new form with new weapons, new strategies. The last war nearly ended us. We lost Earth, our homeworld, to a Wraith bioweapon that rendered the planet uninhabitable for 50,000 years. We survived in generation ships, in habitats, in buried bunkers. When we finally reclaimed Sol, we made a decision. We would not wait for the next cycle. We would become the thing the Wraiths feared." She paused, and a star map flickered into being above the table. It showed the galaxy, marked with thousands of tiny red dots, the beacon network. "We built the beacons and seeded them across the galaxy, then we faked our extinction. We moved our entire civilization into dark space, into the voids between galactic arms, where no star shines and no sensor can reach. We've been there ever since, watching, waiting, maintaining the beacons. When one triggers, the nearest fleet responds. The Compact, the Coalition, every species you know, they exist because we stopped the Wraiths from ever reaching their nursery worlds." Lyrian spoke, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell us? Why let us believe we were alone?" Harlow's gaze was steady. "Because the moment your ancestors knew we existed, they would have sought us out. They would have demanded our technology, our protection, our presence. And the Wraiths would have found us through that noise. Secrecy was our only shield. We sacrificed our place in the light so that you could have one." The weight of the revelation pressed down on the room. Gyra thought of all the frontier colonies she had served on, all the patrols she had flown, the smug confidence of the Compact's military leaders who believed the galaxy was tamed. They had been living in a garden, never knowing the silent guardian standing just beyond the fence. "That's changed now," Vance said. "The Wraiths used a command-level mimic to trip the beacon. They knew exactly what they were doing. They've learned about the network and they're probing for weaknesses. This wasn't an invasion. It was a reconnaissance in force to measure our response." "And what did they learn?" Gyra asked. Harlow's jaw tightened. "They learned the 7th Fleet is here. They also learned our response time, our fleet composition, and our tactical doctrine. We bought information with lives, and now the enemy has that information. The next attack won't be a probe. It will be a full-scale assault aimed at overrunning this sector and punching through to the core." One of the other officers, a severe-faced man with captain's insignia, leaned forward. "Admiral, deep space telemetry just came in. The rift is generating mass shadows on a scale we've never recorded. The Wraiths are consolidating forces, real forces, not the dregs we just swatted. Estimated fleet strength is off the scale." A new hologram materialized, showing the Velar Rift and the surrounding space. The red markers were so dense they formed a solid blob, a hurricane of hostile energy churning toward them. "Time to contact?" Harlow asked. "At their current acceleration, 72 hours. Maybe less if they deploy their phase shift drives. Harlow stood. Then we have 72 hours to prepare the sector for the largest fleet engagement since the fall of Saul. I want every available asset from the 3rd, 5th, and 9th fleets. I want the beacon network hot. I want civilian evacuation of all compact worlds within 100 light years. She turned to Gyra. Commander Tal, I'm drafting you and your crew into this fight. You know the local space better than any of my people. You know the compact protocols, the supply lines, the fallback points. I need you to serve as liaison between my fleet and whatever resistance your governments can muster. Will you do it? Gyra did not hesitate. We will. Rask rumbled his assent. Lyrian nodded, her fear transmuted into something harder. Good, Harlow said, because the Wraiths aren't just coming for us, they're coming for everything. And this time humanity won't fight alone in the dark. The briefing room fell silent as the gravity of what was coming settled over them. Outside, the fleet began to shift its formation, recovering debris, repairing hulls, charging weapons. The 7th Fleet was preparing for war on a scale unseen since the dawn of human memory. And Gyra Tal, frontier officer of a compact that had forgotten the dark, stood on the deck of a ghost ship and prepared to fight beside the ghosts who had been guarding her all along. The star map pulsed, the red tide growing, and the countdown began. The next 60 hours blurred into a cascade of urgent briefings, logistics coordination, and the low, constant hum of the Olympus Mons' Singularity Core ramping to full combat output. Gyra worked alongside human staff officers whose efficiency bordered on the pathological. They absorbed her knowledge of local jump points, gravitational anomalies, and compact military channels with zero wasted motion. Rask was sequestered in one of the engineering bays, his broad, armored frame hunched over human technical schematics that scrolled across holographic displays faster than most organics could track. He emerged only to report progress, or to demand materials that the human quartermasters supplied without question. Lyrian, still recovering from her injuries, embedded herself in the communications hub, bridging the gap between Terran Dominion encryption and compact standard protocols. The first tentative contact with the Compact Defense Command had been a disaster of mutual disbelief and bureaucratic panic. By the 40th hour, however, Compact admirals were speaking directly with Harlow, and the first elements of a joint defense fleet were scrambling from their anchorages. It would not be enough, everyone knew it. Vance found Gyra in an observation blister near the ship's spine, staring out at the assembly of human warships. The 3rd, 5th, and 9th fleets had arrived, phasing in from dark space in eerie silence, their hulls still radiating the absolute cold of the void. Over 800 vessels now formed a layered defense sphere around the system, a constellation of steel and composite armor and weapons that could crack planets. Scared? Vance asked, coming to stand beside her. Gyra's scales rippled in a pattern that was the Veldrin equivalent of a grim smile. Terrified, but I've been terrified since the moment your fleet appeared, and I'm still here. That's the secret, Vance said. Terror doesn't go away. You just learn to act while it's screaming at you. He handed her a data slate. Latest intel. The Wraith Armada is 2 hours out. Long-range scans have identified their flagship. It's a World Eater class. We haven't seen one of those in 400,000 years. The last one took out the entire 2nd Fleet and half of Mars before we brought it down. Gyra studied the image. The World Eater was a moon-sized monstrosity, its surface crawling with weapons blisters and launch bays. It was surrounded by a swarm of lesser vessels, but even those lesser ships dwarfed the human cruisers. How do you kill something like that? She asked. The God Hammer, Vance said. Singularity cannon mounted on the Olympus Mons. It fires a compressed Cugel blitz, a black hole made of pure radiation. If we can get a clean shot, we can core the World Eater. The problem is the shot cycle. The cannon takes 17 minutes to charge, and during that time the Mons is effectively stationary and its shields are diverted to the weapon. will be a target. You need the wraiths distracted. We need them blind. That's where the rest of the fleet comes in, and where you come in. Vance turned to face her fully. Rask tells me the beacon you activated had a secondary system, a quantum entanglement node that linked it to the original human sensor network. He thinks he can repurpose that node to boost our targeting telemetry, give the Godhammer a firing solution that bypasses Wraith jamming. But to do that, he needs direct access to the core data stream during the battle. He needs someone to protect him while he works, and I can't spare any of my Marines. They're all assigned to repel boarders. Jaira met his gaze. You want me to guard Rask while the ship is under attack? I'm asking. You're not under my command, but Rask trusts you, and frankly, you held your nerve when your station was being torn apart. I need someone who won't freeze when the wraiths come through the walls. I'll do it, Jaira said. Vance nodded once, a sharp, economical gesture. Armory, on deck 14. Draw whatever you need. And Commander, when the Godhammer fires, don't look at the beam. It'll burn your optic nerves out from the inside. He walked away, leaving Jaira alone with the view of the assembling fleet and the cold, approaching doom. The final 2 hours dissolved. Jaira found herself in the auxiliary engineering bay deep inside the Olympus Mons, a cramped space filled with humming conduits and the sharp smell of ionized coolant. Rask was already there, his massive claws dancing over a jury-rigged interface that linked the ship's targeting grid to the salvaged entanglement node from Theta 9. A human tech team had helped him build the bridge, but the final calibrations were his alone. This will work, Rask said without looking up. The node is older than any living culture, but it's still coherent. I can piggyback our sensor data onto the original beacon frequency. The Godhammer will see through the Wraith's psychic static like a blade through fog. And the Wraiths will see us doing it, Jaira said, checking the plasma cutter she had drawn from the armory. It was a heavy, inelegant weapon, but it would sever Wraith infiltrator tendrils just as well as it cut hull plating. They will certainly try to stop us, Rask agreed. That is where you become important. The shipwide klaxon sounded, a deep, throbbing pulse. All hands battle stations, enemy fleet entering weapons range. All hands brace for engagement. The deck shuddered. The Olympus Mons was moving, its massive drives pushing it forward into the teeth of the enemy formation. On the monitor linked to the external feeds, Jaira saw the Wraith armada resolve into terrible clarity, a wall of dark hulls stretching across the system, the World Eater a bloated shadow at its center. The human fleet opened fire. Space became a lattice of energy beams, missile trails, and the silent detonations of dying ships. The Godhammer began its charge cycle, a rising whine that vibrated through the deck plates and set Jaira's teeth on edge. 17 minutes, Rask said, his voice eerily calm. The charge cannot be interrupted. The first Wraith boarding pod struck the hull. The ship's internal defense grid responded with a fury of automated turrets and sealed bulkheads, but the Wraiths were relentless. Their infiltrators were semi-corporeal, creatures of folded shadow and serrated appendages that could ooze through gaps in molecular structure. Jaira heard the screaming of metal as something breached the compartment 2 sections away. Her grip on the plasma cutter tightened. Keep working, she told Rask. I'll handle them. The bulkhead door buckled inward. Then it dissolved, and the shadows poured through. The Wraith infiltrator was less a creature and more a wound in reality, a shifting, angular presence that hurt to look at directly. It flowed through the shattered bulkhead like oil spilling across water, its form sprouting limbs and blades and sensory organs that formed and dissolved in the span of heartbeats. Jaira did not give it time to orient. She triggered the plasma cutter and swept the beam in a wide arc, severing 2 of the thing's appendages before they could solidify into weapons. The Wraith made no sound, not a scream, not a hiss, but its form recoiled, the severed edges smoking with a cold, black vapor. Behind her, Rask's claws clattered across the interface. The entanglement node is unstable. I need 2 more minutes to lock the phase alignment. You've got them, Jira said, and she advanced on the infiltrator. The wraith lunged. Its central mass compressed and then exploded outward in a spray of needle-thin tendrils, each one aimed at her face, her throat, the gaps in her armored vest. Jira ducked and rolled, coming up with the cutter blazing. She took off another limb, then a third, but the creature simply regrew what it lost, pulling substance from the shadows pooling in the corners of the compartment. A second infiltrator oozed through the breach, then a third. Jira backed toward Rask, placing her body between him and the enemy. Whatever you're doing, do it faster. I am doing it faster, Rask's voice was strained. The node is fighting me. It was designed to interface with human neural patterns, not K-Thari synaptic mapping. One of the infiltrators darted left, trying to flank them. Jira fired, catching it in the center mass. The plasma bolt punched through its form and struck a conduit on the far wall, showering the compartment with sparks. The wraith spasmed and dissolved into a puddle of darkness, but it was already reforming, slower this time but still inexorable. Then the compartment's far door slid open, and human figures in heavy combat armor stormed through. The Marine squad opened fire with weapons that discharged tight beams of ultraviolet light, death to the semi-corporeal wraiths. The infiltrators screeched, a frequency that stabbed into Jira's skull, and tried to retreat. The Marines cut them down with brutal precision, sweeping the compartment clean in less than 10 seconds. Clear, the squad leader shouted. Engineer, what's your status? 15 seconds, Rask gasped. The alignment there. A harmonic pulse rippled through the ship systems. On the tactical monitor, the Godhammer's targeting data resolved from static into a crystalline lock. The World Eater was centered, exposed, its jamming field neutralized by the boosted sensor feed. Admiral Harlow's voice cut across the fleet channel. Godhammer firing. All ships, brace for singularity discharge. The Olympus Mons trembled as if a giant had seized it by the spine. The Godhammer's beam was invisible to the naked eye. It was a compression of space-time, not light, but the effects were unmistakable. The World Eater's central mass caved inward, dragged into a pinpoint of infinite density. The monster ship convulsed, its hull folding and crumpling like foil in a fist. Secondary explosions ripped through its flanks. In less than 30 seconds, the unkillable dreadnought was a collapsing ruin, its debris spiraling into the newborn singularity that had replaced its heart. A cheer went up across the human fleet, relayed through the comms, but it was short-lived. New contacts, a tactical officer shouted. Multiple Wraith capital ships breaking formation, they're accelerating directly toward the Olympus Mons. Collision course. Jira's blood, or the Veldrin equivalent, turned to ice. The Wraiths were sacrificing their remaining heavies in a suicide run. The Godhammer was spent, its capacitor banks drained. The Olympus Mons was exposed, its shield still recovering from the weapon's power draw. All batteries defensive fire, Harlow ordered. Divert all available power to forward shields, brace for impact. The first Wraith suicide ship struck the outer shield layer and detonated, its dark energy core erupting in a sphere of annihilation. The shield held, but the feedback surge sent cascading overloads through half the ship's power grid. The second ship hit harder. The third breached the shield entirely and slammed into the Mons' armored flank, tearing a gash 3 decks deep. Jira was thrown against a console. The world went gray for a moment. When her vision cleared, she saw Rask still at his station, blood, dark and thick, oozing from a crack in his carapace, but his claws were still moving. The beacon node, he rasped. There is a failsafe, a singularity coil built into the original design. If I activate it, it will emit a counterpulse that could deflect the remaining Wraith ships, but the energy release will destroy the node and everything within a kilometer of the activation point. The Olympus Mons is within that radius. We would be sacrificing the beacon, the node, and perhaps this section of the ship. Do it, Jira said, before they ram us again. Rask's mandibles clicked in what might have been a grin. I was hoping you would say that. I have already started the sequence. The deck heaved. On the external feed, Jira saw 3 more Wraith dreadnoughts converging on the Mons, their hulls glowing with the sickly radiance of overloaded dark energy cores. The human fleet was pouring fire into them, but it wasn't enough. They were too close too fast. Rask's console lit up with a countdown. 10 seconds, 9. Commander, Rask said, his voice suddenly soft, it has been an honor serving with you, truly. 8-7. Jira reached out and grasped his claw. The honor has been mine, Rask, all of it. 6-5. The singularity coil activated. A pulse of pure force, born from the same technology that powered the Godhammer, erupted from the salvaged beacon node. It propagated outward in a shimmering sphere, a ripple in the membrane of reality. The Wraith suicide ships struck the wave front and were not just stopped. They were diverted, their trajectories bent by 90 degrees, hurled away from the Olympus Mons and into the waiting guns of the human fleet. 4, 3, 2, 1. The pulse faded. The beacon node shattered into dust. Rask slumped over his console, his carapace smoking, his breathing shallow and ragged. Medic, Jira screamed. We need a medic. Human corpsemen flooded the compartment, but even as they worked, Jira could see the light fading from Rask's multifaceted eyes. He reached up with a trembling claw and pressed something into her palm, a data chip, slick with his blood. Decrypted, the original signal, he whispered. It wasn't a distress call. It was a challenge, a declaration. They know where Earth is. They wanted the fleet to come. The war, it was never here. It was always going to be there. His claw fell limp. The corpsemen tried for another minute, then one of them shook their head. Jira stood in the smoke-filled compartment, the data chip warm in her hand, and felt a grief so vast it had no name. Around her, the human fleet was finishing off the last of the Wraith armada, but the victory tasted like ash. Because Rask was gone, and with his last act he had handed them a truth far worse than any enemy fleet. The Wraiths were going to Earth. The aftermath of the battle was a graveyard of drifting hulls and cooling plasma. Human salvage teams moved through the debris, recovering escape pods, retrieving black boxes, and vaporizing any Wraith remnants that still twitched with malevolent unlife. The Olympus Mons limped into a stable orbit, its wounds gaping and sparking, but its spine unbroken. Jira sat in the auxiliary medical bay, her arm wrapped in a regenerative bandage, the data chip clutched in her undamaged hand. She had not let it go since Rask pressed it into her palm. She had watched the corpseman carry his body away, wrapped in a thermal shroud, and she had not cried. Veldrin did not cry. Their grief was expressed in the stillness of their scales, in the way they held themselves perfectly motionless to honor the fallen. She had been motionless for over an hour. Vance found her there. His armor was scored and dented, a fresh burn trailing across his left cheek, but his stride was steady. "The Admiral wants to see you," he said. "She's been briefed on Rask's work. She knows about the decryption." Jira stood, her joints aching. "He gave his life to get that information. I want to be there when you act on it." Vance nodded and led her through the ship's wounded corridors. Damage control crews swarmed everywhere, sealing breaches and shoring up compromised bulkheads. The smell of burnt insulation and vaporized metal hung heavy in the air. They passed a makeshift triage center where human wounded lay on cots, their faces pale but their eyes still fierce. Some of them gave Jira small nods as she passed. She returned them. Harlow's briefing room was smaller than the grand chamber where they had first met, a tactical command center deep in the ship's armored core. The Admiral stood before a holographic star chart, her uniform singed, her expression carved from something harder than diamond. "Commander Tal," she said as Jira entered, "I'm told you have the decrypted signal." Jira placed the data chip on the table. Rask deciphered it before he died. The original transmission that triggered the beacon, it was never a distress call. It was a Wraith challenge, broadcast on a frequency only your network would recognize. They were daring you to respond. The holographic display shifted to show the decrypted transmission. It was a single phrase, repeated in an ancient Terran language, laced with harmonics that seemed to writhe and twist. "We remember Earth. We are coming home." Harlow stared at the words, her jaw tightened. "They have Saul's coordinates." "They've had them for a long time, it seems," Vance said. "The only thing that kept them from attacking was the beacon network. They knew if they massed a fleet big enough, we'd detect it and respond before they could reach the inner systems. So they probed us. They triggered the beacon to see how fast we'd come. Now they know our response time, our fleet composition, and our tactics. And they know the network exists. The next move isn't here, it's Earth." One of the other officers, a vice admiral with a cybernetic eye, spoke up. "Saul's defenses are formidable, but they haven't been tested against a full-scale Wraith assault in millennia. If the enemy commits their entire reserve force—" "They will," Harlow said. "This was always their endgame. They didn't come to the Rift to invade the Compact. They came to draw us out and bleed us of information. We gave them a fight, but we also gave them exactly what they wanted, confirmation that the Terran Dominion is still alive and still guarding the galaxy. Now they'll throw everything they have at our home." She turned to Gyra. "Commander, your crew has been through more than any non-human in recorded history. You've lost a friend. You've seen things the Compact will take generations to process. I'm offering you a choice. We're recalling all fleets to Saul. This ship, as damaged as it is, will lead the formation. You can disembark here, reconnect with your people, and tell them what you've witnessed. Or you can come with us to Earth and stand with us in the fight that's coming. Whatever you choose, humanity will not forget what you and Rask did." Gyra didn't need time to think. "Rask died to give you that intelligence. He believed your fight was worth his life. I will not dishonor that by walking away. I'll go to Earth." Harlow's lips curved into something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. "Then, welcome aboard, Commander Tau. You're about to see the one thing no non-human has ever witnessed, the Saul system under full war alert." The fleet began its transition within the hour. The 7th, 3rd, 5th, and 9th fleets formed into a single, vast armada and engaged their dark space drives, slipping into the between-realm where distance had no meaning. Gyra stood on the bridge of the Olympus Mons, watching the stars smear into streaks of impossible color and then vanish entirely. The journey felt both instantaneous and eternal. When the fleet re-emerged into normal space, Gyra's breath caught in her throat. Saul was a blue-white sun, hotter and younger than the stars of the core. Orbiting it was a world that could only be Earth, a sphere of deep blues and vivid greens, scarred in places by what looked like ancient impact craters that had been terraformed back to life, but unmistakably alive. And around that world, stretching from low orbit to the edge of the heliopause, was the most massive concentration of military force Gyra had ever seen. Orbital defense platforms, each one the size of a small moon, bristled with weapons that glowed with ready power. Shipyards churned out new hulls, the sparks of construction drones swarming like fireflies. Battle stations floated in geometric formations, their shields overlapping to form a near-impenetrable web. And beyond them, thousands of warships, tens of thousands, hung in waiting, their hulls bearing the insignia of fleets Gyra had never heard of. "Welcome to Saul," Vance said quietly. "This is what we've been hiding for 200,000 years. Every ship, every station, every gun, all built for one purpose, to make sure that if the Wraiths ever came home, they'd find a welcome they wouldn't survive." Gyra stared at the armada, and for the first time since Rask's death, a flicker of something other than grief stirred in her chest. It was hope, fierce and fragile and burning. "They're really coming, aren't they?" she asked. "They're already on the way," Harlow said, joining them at the viewport. "Deep space telemetry picked up their advance fleet 20 minutes ago. They'll be in Saul within 48 hours. Every human who can hold a weapon is being called to stations. Every ship that can fly is being armed. This will be the largest battle since the fall. And this time, we're not fighting alone. She looked at Jaira. Your people, the Compact, they've been contacted. Some of their governments are sending ships. Not many, not enough. But it's a start. You've already changed the galaxy, Commander. Now we just have to survive long enough to see what that change grows into. Jaira looked out at Earth, at the flotilla of warships, at the distant stars where the enemy was already gathering. She thought of Rask, of his sacrifice, of the data chip still warm in her pocket. We will survive, she said. We have to. The countdown to the final battle had begun. The 48 hours before the Wraith arrival evaporated in a blur of frantic preparation. Jaira was given a position on the Olympus Mons' auxiliary tactical staff, her knowledge of compact fleet protocols proving unexpectedly useful in coordinating with the small but growing contingent of alien warships that had answered humanity's call. A dozen species had sent vessels, from the hulking battleships of the Cathari Protectorate, Rask's people, who had demanded to fight in his memory, to the swift, glass-like cruisers of the Inari Commonwealth. They were a fraction of the human fleet, but their presence was a declaration. The galaxy would not stand aside. Jaira slept in brief, unsatisfying cycles and ate human ration bars that tasted like compressed minerals. She did not complain. She barely noticed. Her mind was fixed on the tactical display that showed the Wraith advance fleet inching closer, a spreading stain of hostile icons that grew denser by the hour. When the final alarm sounded, it was almost a relief. The waiting was over. All hands to battle stations, Harlow's voice rang across the fleet-wide channel. Enemy fleet has entered the heliopause. Estimated time to contact, 20 minutes. All ships weapons free. All defense platforms activate firing solutions. This is the defense of Earth. There is no fallback. There is no retreat. We hold the line or we die on it. The human fleet, the full assembled might of the Terran Dominion, moved as one. Jaira had seen the 7th Fleet fight, but this was something else entirely. Over 30,000 warships formed into layered defensive shells around Earth and Mars and the orbital platforms. The Godhammer on the Olympus Mons was only one of 12 singularity cannons scattered throughout the defense grid, each one charged and aimed at the approaching darkness. The Wraith fleet emerged from the deep black like a tide of ink spilling across the stars. It was larger than anything Jaira had imagined, larger than the tactical projections, larger than the worst-case scenarios the human admirals had drawn up. At its heart was not one world eater but 5, each one escorted by thousands of lesser vessels. Behind them came carriers, troop transports, and a class of ship Jaira's database couldn't even categorize. Vast, oblong structures that pulsed with a sickly inner light, as if they carried something alive and hungry inside them. They brought everything, Vance murmured from his station. Every Wraith that's ever existed, the last 10,000 generations all at once. Then we end them all at once, Harlow said. All singularity cannons fire on my command. The Godhammer spoke. The space between the fleets tore open as 12 Kugelblitzes detonated in the heart of the Wraith formation, each one devouring everything within a 100-kilometer radius. 2 world eaters died instantly, their mass collapsing into miniature singularities. A third was crippled, its flank gouged open. The Wraith advance staggered. But they did not break. The remaining world eaters returned fire, their null beams slicing through the forward human screen. Ships exploded by the dozens, frigates, destroyers, cruisers, their debris scattering across the void. The human fleet answered with everything it had. Missile swarms blanketed the darkness. Railgun rounds punched through Wraith hulls. Boarding torpedoes delivered armored Marines directly into enemy capital ships, where they fought with the desperate, unyielding ferocity of a species that had spent eons preparing for exactly this moment. Jaira coordinated the alien contingent, vectoring Inari interceptors to cover a breach in the left flank, directing Cathari battleships to concentrate fire on a wounded Wraith carrier. The aliens fought with a courage that surprised even themselves, their ships weaving through the apocalyptic crossfire with a grace that human tacticians had not anticipated. They took losses, terrible losses, but they held. And then the 5 world eaters reached the inner defensive line. The Olympus Mons shuddered under a direct hit from a null beam. Alarms screamed. Damage reports flooded the bridge. Harlow, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead, refused to leave her command chair. "Ram the lead world eater," she ordered. "All remaining forward batteries target the central core. We'll take that monster with us if we have to." Admiral Vance began. "That's an order, Captain. You have the bridge after I'm gone." But before the Mons could commit to its suicide run, the tactical display flickered. A new contact appeared, a single ship, smaller than a frigate, emerging from dark space directly in front of the lead world eater. Its hull was unmarked, its design unfamiliar even to the human database. A transmission cut across all channels. A voice, translated into perfect Terran standard, spoke 3 words. "For Rask, fire." The ship detonated. Not a simple self-destruct, a singularity implosion, identical in profile to the Godhammer's discharge, but compressed into a vessel barely 100 meters long. The blast caught the lead world eater at point-blank range, and the monstrous Wraith ship folded in on itself, its core collapsing into oblivion. Gyra stared at the screen. The ship's signature, its energy profile, its sacrifice, she knew it. The Cathari had built a weapon using the data Rask had gathered, the singularity technology he had helped unlock. They had built a bomb, and one of their own had flown it into the heart of the enemy. "Rask's legacy," she whispered. "He gave them the means." The remaining world eaters reeled. The human fleet, galvanized by the sacrifice, surged forward. The Godhammers cycled and fired again. The Wraith formation fractured, then shattered. The enemy tried to retreat, but the human dark space interdiction field had already gone active. There was no escape. The Wraiths, the ancient terror that had haunted the galaxy for 1,000,000 years, were hunted down and obliterated, ship by ship, until nothing remained but cooling wreckage and a silence that felt like the first breath after drowning. The battle for Earth was over. Humanity had won. In the aftermath, Gyra stood with Vance and Harlow on the observation deck, watching the salvage operations. The stars had returned, the darkness pushed back. Earth spun below them, scarred but unbroken. "It's done," Harlow said. "The Wraiths are extinct. The beacon network will be deactivated. Humanity can come home." "Not home," Vance corrected gently. "We never really left. We just lived in the shadows so long we forgot what the light looked like. Now we have to learn again, and we won't do it alone." He looked at Gyra. "The Terran Dominion is extending a formal invitation to the Compact, an alliance. No more secrets, no more hidden fleets. We'll share what we know, what we've built, and we'll stand together against whatever else the universe throws at us. Will your people accept?" Gyra thought of Rask, of his sacrifice, of the Cathari ship that had flown into the dark. She thought of the aliens who had fought beside humanity in the most desperate battle in galactic history, and of the billions who would now live because of that alliance. "They will," she said. "I'll make sure of it." Vance extended his hand, a human gesture she had come to understand. She took it, her scaled fingers closing around his palm. The Olympus Mons turned toward Earth, toward the dawn spreading across the planet's curved horizon, and the human fleet, the war fleet that had descended from the darkness to answer a desperate call, began the long, slow journey home. Behind them, the beacon that had started it all was silent, but its message had been heard and its promise had been kept. Humanity had come, and this time they would stay. The stars at last were safe.